Wilderness and Parks Society. I think I've got the
Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society.
It's a late night, huh? And we're going to look at LULUCF, which is this package of policies trying to deal with forestry in the developed world. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we should start by outlining what they are, what these packages of policies are, and then how far we've come over the last couple of weeks.
Okay. So the acronym means land use change, and forestry. But like I said to you in China, it's really mostly been about forestry. Mm-hmm. So the question is, do developed countries have to account for emissions from forestry, from logging? And of course they should. And of course these emissions should be going down, like we expect to happen everywhere. But developed countries want to increase them instead, and they want to increase them but fix the rules in such a way that it's completely off the books. So increase emissions, annual emissions of 500 million tons of CO2 a year. It's really big, and they don't want to account for it. So they proposed this rule set that would allow them to keep it off the books so nobody would see it. And they did this by essentially, rather than taking a baseline in the past from which to measure what's happening to their emissions, they're taking a baseline in the future. When their emissions are going to be higher. So as far as the accounting is concerned, there's no emission. As far as the atmosphere is concerned, a really big one. So we call that the logging loophole, and they've been working on it for a couple of years now. And we were afraid that it could get cemented here, it could get agreed to here. And one of the reasons we're afraid of that is because this is a subject area that the people don't seem to understand very well and people aren't very aware of. But we've got some good news. So the good news is that they did not agree to it here. A decision was not made, largely because some countries were holding out. The country of Tuvalu in particular held out very strongly against this, as they often do in these negotiations. They hold out for environmental integrity. The African group also expressed concerns and put forward alternative proposals. And of course, we in the environmental community were expressing a lot of concern about it. So the good news is, there's really two bits of good news. One, that the decision was not made here, which could have been, and all of the developed countries thought really they had it in the bag. So we live to fight another day on that. But the other thing, which is really important, is the decisions under the Kyoto Protocol and under the long-term cooperative action, the two negotiating tracks, they both have a paragraph that recognize essentially the existence of loopholes and urge parties to not only increase their ambition, but to increase ambition and increase their targets while considering the impact of these loopholes on what their targets are. So in the past, we've been railing against this for 2 or 3 years now. And everybody kind of looks at you funny, and the negotiators or the countries will say, well, no, this is our pledge is real, blah blah blah, and the fight has been to actually convince people that there's a problem. And now, if this text, these decisions get approved tonight, what we'll have at the end of the day is a recognition that there is a problem in the bigger level, that these loopholes do actually undermine what countries say they're doing and undermine effective climate mitigation. And then on the other hand, we haven't locked in this bad decision. So I feel like we've got a good basis moving forward to fix this, especially acknowledging that in the draft decision on forestry that wasn't made here, that will be discussed next year, there are other options that are better. So we have options that are better, we have an acknowledgement of the problem at a higher level, and we didn't lock into the bad rules, and we didn't lock in the logging loophole. So I'm actually feeling pretty good right now.
It sounds like it's been a good evening all round as far as most of these policies are concerned. So the strategy sounds familiar. Lots of NGOs have been highlighting the gigaton gap when it comes to emissions and trying to get parties, to the countries, to acknowledge the problem first and then to work on it and to improve it. What is the next step now, do you think, when we come to the intersessionals and come to the campaigns in the coming year? Is it really going to be focused on shifting parties' positions?
Yeah, it is really going to be shifted. It really is going to be focused on shifting parties' positions, and it's going to be, people are going to have a lot of work to do at home in their own countries. So, for example, all of my European colleagues will be very focused on getting Europe up to that 30%. Right? But now it's not just going to be get them up to the 30%, it's going to be get them up to the 30% and look at the impact of these loopholes. Because a bunch of environmental organizations, including mine, released a report last week which showed what the impact of the logging loophole was on pledges. So on the European pledge of 30%, if they get there, the logging loophole means that effectively that pledge is only 27%. So the discussion back home in countries is going to be not only set your target higher in line with what the science says it needs to be, but if there are any loopholes lying around, you have to jack it up that much higher to make sure it's real. So yeah, I think that's where the focus is going to be, really at home, putting pressure on these governments to come with more ambition into the next year.
And just finally then, can we get a sense of which parties would have been arguing for what tonight? Who's pushing for these loopholes, for them to be kept in? You've mentioned Tuvalu's kind of blocked these loopholes from being embedded in the text, but where are the interests here? Where is the negotiation happening?
Well, basically all of the developed countries, all the big ones, and all the big ones with any kind of forest sector, we're pretty united on this. They all want it, and it's a loophole for everyone, but it's a bigger loophole for some than others. So, for example, New Zealand is a great example because they say that their emission reduction pledge is 20% from 2000, I think. Or no, it's 1990, 20% from 1990. But the relative to their 1990 emissions, what they plan to do with their logging is to increase emissions by 65%. So, you add that 65% increase onto their 20% reduction, and they're actually talking about increasing emissions by 45% relative to 1990. So they've been one of the really negative players in this. The other ones at the top of the list are Australia, Austria, Finland, Sweden. They've been the ones that have really been pushing, not just pushing the hardest for this loophole, but really exploiting it the most, more than anyone else. And actually another example is Russia. Actually, their loophole is bigger than anyone's. But how do you deal with Russia? It's always a really sensitive issue. As you saw here this week, they're saying, we're out of Kyoto Protocol. There's not going to be a second commitment period for us. So, it's hard to know what to do with Russia and how to push them. But these other countries, we should be in a much better position to get them to improve their policies coming into next year.
Chris, it's great to hear that there's good news on LULUCF as well as many other areas of these talks tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to go to a short video now, but we'll be back with some more analysis in a couple of minutes, and we'll continue throughout the night until I completely lose the ability to introduce people properly. Thanks very much.